What's up again, my friends? How's it going today? It's Carpo. It's a nice, beautiful day here in Portland in the mid 70s right now. I've been thinking this morning maybe I'd make a video, and so I decided to just make it. And I really haven't thought about what I'm going to talk about except for a couple things. Basically, this crazy, chaotic life we live in, and how easy it is to get wrapped up in things that are trivial. But I'll start at the beginning, I guess. I, like most of you, like all of you, have been through some great times and some hard times in my life. And, as I was coming out to make this video, I was thinking, well, I haven't made one in a few days, and I don't even know if it's going to upload because my computer crapped out. In fact, my computer crapped out at the same time as my phone got somehow reset, and I lost a whole bunch of notes that I'd taken for some book I was going to write. Just all these little digital things that were happening, that were complicating, and I kind of stepped back and laughed at it all. And I thought, it's the same issues I have with my website, not knowing how to change stuff on there. And when you really step back sometimes and just laugh at the absurdity of this world we've created for ourselves, it's not our fault as individuals, of course, but human curiosity and, interest in progress is what's led us to this point where we're all just confused. And well, I shouldn't say we're all confused, but we're all to an extent confused and lost and unsure if we're going on the right path. And it's easy to look back on our lives later and say, oh shit, I should have done this, or I could have done this. I'm not one to live with regret, and I'm not one to the shoulda, coulda, woulda attitude just doesn't work for me. I mean, I've seen enough people who say, oh God, if my parents hadn't done this, or if this hadn't happened to me, then I wouldn't be this way, or I wouldn't have these problems. And it's like, look, well, you do, and here we are. And all of us have problems. So what I'm getting at is that the victim card is pretty much useless. It gets you some sympathy for a while, but you start to realize that those who seem tough out there have been through a lot too. So when we look at the big problems, say losing a job, losing your house, whether to a fire or to financial difficulties, get out of here, flicking wasp, whatever it might be, or a wasp harassing you while you're making a video. Problems are what we make them. It's really a perspective issue, and I learned that through Manly P. Hall mostly, and to look at things differently than it's really the mental alchemy, changing your perspective on things. So you learn to laugh at the little stuff, but it's really easy to get wrapped up in the world's big problems. And so that's really what I wanted to talk about the most. We all have our little personal problems that we can dwell on and kind of escape from the larger problems, but it doesn't mean that they're any less important. In fact, our personal problems are even more important than the bigger picture, because if we're not feeling functional or coherent, or we're not able to enjoy our lives to some extent, then we're not going to try to better the world. And I think that's how we got to where we're at right now, where a lot of people are unhappy with their lives, and so they want to make the world catered to their needs and desires. And this is how we get greed and corruption, and how people can justify harming other people, in the sake of, well, for any reason, really. It's easy to look around and you want to just scream sometimes. You want to stand up for those who say can't stand up for themselves. And it's so easy for us to turn on the television and see all the problems of the world and get immersed in it and say, this is where the whole, I would say, I got to tread lightly on this subject, because I would say there have always been those who are fighting for social justice. That I consider myself one of those people. When I see something that's wrong, I speak out. And I don't think people should ever be suppressed or oppressed. But it bred the social justice warrior. Now, the social justice warrior would be more like a conspiracy theorist compared to a person who believes a conspiracy. In other words, you'll find it in there. Follow me here on the metaphor. There's the analogy, I guess. In the conspiracy world, once you find out about one thing, you tend to believe all of it and kind of fall into it all. Well, a lot of people who are fighting for one cause are fighting for a lot of causes. It's about breaking people free from their bondage, their oppression, whether it's people who have polluted waterways because of an oil company, or folks who are treated badly because of their race in different parts of the country. And so you have people from, say, these, what some people would call these elite coastal communities of, people who, states are completely different, let's just say, throughout the United States. The way that different areas operate, the way that Mississippi deals with its racial issues is completely different from the way where I live as Portland does. But it doesn't mean that one place is better, and that's the point I'm getting at. It's easy for us to point the finger at other people and say, look at how messed up your community is. Look how stupid you guys are, and look at the bad decisions you've made. And not just within the nation here, but looking at other communities in other, I should say, not just our nation looking at other cities within the nation, but of course us looking at other countries. Oh, look what's wrong with Russia, and look what's wrong with China. Look what's wrong with all these other people, instead of, being able to see the plank in your own eye, as they say. So it's interesting to see people who point the finger a lot. You realize it often points back to themselves and their inability to really understand the depth, the complexity of what other people go through. And that brings me kind of what I was getting at the beginning, where it's easy to think that we've had a hard life and it's been tough for us, but we don't know what others go through. We don't. And sometimes it can go the opposite way, where somebody who's led a relatively easy life sees somebody who's living in hardship and thinks, oh man, I have to stand up for this person. And then you find out maybe that person's happier than you are. It's an interesting kind of a catch. It seems that people who face the most adversity, and sometimes even poverty, up to an extent, they learn to fight harder, and to cope with change, to cope with life, and to say what really matters is family and friends. We in the Western world, we've kind of given up on that in a lot of ways. It's like work is more important for us, than, say, raising a family. It's all about making the money and financial woes, because we're so scared of being poor or being broke. And so when we see countries that have less than we do, people who are still living in lesser buildings or huts, whatever it might be, it's easy to think, oh, they must be suffering. But in many cases, these people have lived this way for thousands of years. And say we encounter tribes in the Amazon, it was always the white man's job to say, oh, well, we need to change these savages and give them Christianity and give them a Bible, and we'll show them how to farm properly. And then, of course, their crops are devastated, and they're like, screw you guys. But my point being there, I guess, that you want to trust those who seem like they're doing better. So it's the way that someone views someone from the West, say, coming in and say, wow, these people have boats, they have horses, they have weapons, they must be doing something right. God must be in their favor, right? Well, I feel like the way that people see us, we also see that in rich people, or at least that's changing, but it's kind of this American ideal that, if you get rich, you're going to be happy. And it's complete lunacy. I don't understand it, but I understand it only to the extent that financial woes cause us a lot of heartache in life. And I understand that because it is my number one issue. I have all these hobbies and interests. I don't really look down on myself, except for the fact that, I'm not making enough money, or I'm not business oriented. And I'm like, but that's programming that's been put into my mind by the society I've been raised in. And I'm saying, but that's where you've got to be. And kind of gets to the main, really, if I were going to make any point, it wouldn't be about, how we see the world, but rather, you get to a point where you realize that it's very difficult to even explain. I don't even know how to explain it to myself. It's like our image of society is based on our upbringing, and when we get to a certain point in our life, often we realize we were wrong, and that we've been either lied to, not on purpose always. I mean, you hear this a lot on YouTube and in blogs where people are like, oh, we've been raised to believe this, and we've been lied to about everything, whatever it might be. In other words, some people have said, well, historically this science was wrong, and somebody says, well, then all the shit I've been taught is wrong. And there seems to be a growing movement of people who suspect that everything is bullshit. And I can see quite clearly, plain as day, where that stems from. The less that you really know, the more likely you are to say everything's a lie. And the more knowledge and information we gain on one subject, we realize that things are the way they are, not always because of a giant conspiracy. Often that's the case, there's always money involved, but sometimes it's just plain ignorance, or perhaps we're the ones that are wrong, where we think we're more aware than we are, and those around us end up being, let's just say, the ignorant other side are often the ones, who we find maybe they had a good point. When I was saying earlier about how different cultures, say somebody in Mississippi deals with racism differently than here in Portland, I guess a perfect example of what I'm talking about would be that this Saturday in my town, well, just right across the bridge, there's going to be the Proud Boys and two other, alt-right groups which are meeting in Portland. And this has been ongoing in Portland, and a lot of folks know this. Portland was considered the skinhead capital of the nation at one time, and in the 80s there was a major issue where some skinheads had, they were beating up somebody in a car. A cab driver tried to stop it. He was an immigrant, a success story. He was a citizen that had moved here, immigrant that had moved here to become a citizen and drive a taxi cab. Your traditional story, and he tried to break up the fight, and one of the skinheads turned and cracked his skull and killed him. And it started a huge movement against skinheads. In fact, they got sued. I can't remember the guy's name, but one of their main groups got sued for like $12.5 million and ended up bankrupting the group, which to me is great because, skinheads are bullshit. They're just cowards. That's just my opinion. But the thing is, what came out of that was what's happening today. The reason why they're holding all these, Portland meetings is because they want to. It's basically they're luring out the Antifa group. And let me tell you, Portland is well known for Antifa. And I just wanted to bring that up to say that I think Antifa are a bunch of fucking pussies too. And they're not getting anything done, they're not accomplishing anything, and they do not represent the liberal standpoint, the democratic standpoint, the left, any of that. They're just a bunch of angry kids who want to fight against someone else and are willing to use physical intimidation tactics and violence to do so, believing that they're justified in doing so because others use violence. To me, that's just a complete... let me just put it this way. I'm not saying that violence is never justified. I'm saying that putting masks on your face and going around throwing, shit on people and... not shit literally, but from what I understand, there was some tactics that were less than desirable that were used by these guys. But what I'm getting at is that anytime one group forms an opinion or a standpoint, there's going to be a complete opposite reaction to that from a group who says, no, you're wrong, and opposes it. And in the bigger version of that, we end up with wars, constantly at war with other nations. And we're wrapped up with our little trivialities, which are major societal issues, but at the same time, there are people going out and dying for their countries over purposes we don't even understand. And meanwhile, the corporations are, taking as much as they can. A lot of agencies are being shut down that protect the land, and there's a lot more pollution, regardless of what people think we're doing to improve the planet. We're kind of fucked. And that's really the main crux, I guess. The main point here is that if we really want to be happy in the short life we have, we've got to be able to understand where people are coming from, our society. We can't walk away from it all. If we're going to still live within society's boundaries, within our cities, whatever. You can move out to the woods if you choose. That's even harder to do, of course. We won't go into that, but you know what I'm saying. It's like, we have choices to make as to how much we want to immerse ourselves in the world's bullshit. Whether it's the world political stage or other nations with whether it's hunger, there are so many things is my point. And that's why I've spent all this time talking about it and really not even get the main point across, that there is so much shit out there to worry about that sometimes when we step back from it all, we realize what really matters, which is, as selfish as it sounds, our individual lives. Because if we're not living with what we want to see in the world, then we're not really... I guess each person kind of has their own path. I'm not saying that we have to live in a certain standard at all. Some people let's say, are not family oriented. Other people are. You know, some people are hard workers, some people are thinkers, some people are artists, and all of us together as humans fulfill this interesting niche in nature that we don't understand, can't comprehend. And we've been fighting for so long about what's normal, what's natural, what's right. You know, whether it's GMOs or racism or sexism or cultural differences, you know, there are so many things that we could argue about. And I just pray that one day, and not pray, I hate that word. I hope that one day, hope is kind of a shitty word too. Well, it's the best we've got. You know, I'd like to see that one day we can actually bridge the gap. And that's really my only intention. When I think about what's my goal in bringing up a particular subject, I thought, you know, it shouldn't be to cause an argument. It should be to bridge the gap. There are some gaps that just cannot be bridged. I mean, there are some horrible mindsets out there. I'd like to think that each person has an equal, you know, valid point, but some people are just idiots. So we have to live with that too. So anyhow, that's my long rambling rant video. It's getting really hot out here, so I'm going to head out. And thanks for listening for what it's worth. I hope I made some points at least. It's just kind of maybe thinking out loud. I have to get back into it. Couldn't get away without sirens every time. Talk to you all later.